Now that we've obtained a working digital elevation model and stitched it together from the four subtiles, we can actually go ahead and remove those tiles from our working drawing. Remember, we loaded these in from our download folder, and if you did that, you can actually, now that you have this saved to your project folder, you can actually go ahead and just delete out your downloads, right? And it saves space. You're not downloading and saving extra information that's duplicated in the product that we have here in front of us. But let's go ahead and jump into how to use this. And so as promised in the assignment sheet, I want to go ahead and quickly show you some of the different applications for what we can do with the digital elevation model. Because honestly, being able to come in and click on a point, and what it's doing is that you're actually seeing the elevation values pop up here. As I go through this, the pixel value. And so that's that grid cell. And again, this is a very, very tight grid, being that I believe this is at 1 foot by 1 foot, and so you can see that you're just going to kind of move around. You can go and pull those spot values, right? And so, I mean, it's useful if you're developing a grading document. But for representing the landscape and understanding the landscape, we need a bit more. Again, we're going to use go to analysis, and we're going to go to our tools. And underneath the toolboxes, again, we're going to come down here to spatial analyst tools. Remember, if this isn't working, it means that you don't have your extension turned on. You've got to do that back under the project menu. Go down and manage your licenses. But I do want to go ahead and show you all of these different tools that are available for you to start to study the landscape. And so one of those certainly is just the ability to see it. And what you're going to see is we're going to use the Hillshade tool. Hillshade is just going to create a representation, a two-dimensional representation of the landscape. A 3D representation of the landscape here in this 2D format. And so all you need to do is go to this. You need to tell it where you want it to save, right? And so you can probably go ahead and save this into our you can see I've already run some of these. Oops, if I could spell it correctly. There we go. Mount Rushmore, Hillshade. I think that's good enough for me. You can play around with this. You can run it with shadows and without shadows. Right now I'm going to run it without. Shadows really just start to wash out the resolution that I'm typically looking for. Now, if you're working with a particularly flat landscape and it comes up and it's not really helping you understand things, one of the things you can do is you can come in here and change the Z value. And by changing the Z value, what it's going to do is it's going to exaggerate everything in the vertical, right? So if you have a known change to it. So 3 is a typical number that could be put in here. It's going to exaggerate. So if there's 1 foot change in elevation, it's actually going to show it as a 3 foot change. And the reason for that is purely to help you visualize what's going on in the landscape. I guarantee the landscape here in front of us is going to have lots and lots of vertical change. So I'm going to go ahead and hit run, and I'm going to pause the video while it takes care of that. All right, and so now you have a hillshade here in front of us. Again, we can start to come over here. It's Mount Rushmore, so we can actually see that here on the map there's the theater. What we mean by the theater is that it's part of the facilities that looks up to the 4 presidents. And actually, if we zoom in here, I can actually show you that, again, we got to let the resolution catch up for us, right? At 1 foot contour, it's there. It'll take a minute, because what you're going to actually be able to see is that here's Washington. I think it's in order. I think it's Roosevelt, Jefferson, might be Jefferson, Roosevelt, and then this is actually Abraham Lincoln. And you can actually see kind of the crest of their head right here on the DEM, right? Again, the data comes from overhead looking straight down, so we're not going to be able to see the facial features necessarily sticking off, but you can actually see the kind of the crown of the heads, really clearly off of this information here. Now, one of the things that we can do with this is that, remember that you can always go ahead and turn this into a scene, so bring it into a 3D environment. And so this looks great, but you can't kind of get a sense for how the landscape works here. And so remember, we can always come over to insert, and I can tell it, not new, I want a new local scene. And I'm going to create a local scene from this map. Actually, that's not what I want to do. I'm sorry about that. I'm going to come back into my map 1, and I want it to actually, instead of creating a new, I want it to actually convert this over. And so We're going to let it process here for a second, get me back. And certainly we could go through the process of actually creating a new scene and adding data into it and dragging this across. Again, I knew that there was another tool to do what I was looking to do. So under view, actually, you can go to convert, and I'm going to convert this to a local scene. And what this is going to allow me to do is it's going to take this information we just created in the hillshade, and it's actually going to go ahead and match that to the world elevation data. And so it's not that the hillshade itself has become three-dimensional. It's actually a two-dimensional file type. But what it is going to do is it is going to go ahead and lay this on top of the 3D model that, for elevation that Esri has created. And the results are pretty amazing. And again, you can kind of see where that looking down from on top kind of looks like Washington's head's down a little bit. Roosevelt or Jefferson, one of those there, and then Lincoln is hanging out over here, right there, that point there, right? But again, now we can actually get down into the landscape and we can see what it looks like, right? And so that's what we're ultimately trying to use GIS for, is to really help us, both for us as designers and for our clients, to help get a better sense for the landscape. And the ability to move in and around a 3D environment is pretty fantastic in terms of kind of what this allows us to do in this space. Now, I'm going to go back into map 1 because I want to show you a few other things. And the other things I want to show you are just other tools that exist here in this spatial analyst tool, or tools underneath surface. You can go ahead and create an aspect. And so again, if we wanted to know kind of which direction the hills are facing, and we're here in Indiana, and so this doesn't often pop up as much for us. Remember to use the original DEM. Don't use the hillshade for this. And then you're going to create, yes, I want it in my folder there, but I actually don't want it called that. I want it called Mount Rushmore aspect. Drop that in together and let that run. While that's running, but we're here in Indiana, and just remember that there isn't that much topography here to speak of, but vegetative community. So vegetation tends to find based on hill. It finds its own microclimate. It can help us understand that. We can also look at wind directions, so exposed versus unexposed slopes. It's all important information as we start looking at aspects. So I'm going to go ahead and let this run, and I will bounce back in a minute. Now, aspect creates one of the most adventurous color schemes that you can possibly find in ArcGIS. And one of the things that I will say is that it's overwhelming, right? I kind of love the way it looks. It'd be great wall art. Not so excellent for sharing with community partners when we're talking about specific things. And often that's just kind of a nature of we don't need all of this information, right? And so one of those things that I often do, just kind of focus in on, like, if I want to just study western slopes, all I'm doing right now is going ahead and turning off all the other colors and then letting it come back in and populate. And what this is doing is I now have the west and northwest, so the ones that are going to be exposed to the most severe winter conditions. I can now go ahead, I could go ahead and change these out and make them both red, right? And say, in terms of kind of humans on the landscape, these are probably some of the most severe conditions that during the winter time are going to be very challenging for people, just because of the particular wind exposure, right? And so this is really how we go ahead and use aspect. In addition to aspects, let's go ahead and jump back into our toolbox here. The other thing I wanted to show you is that this is also when you can go ahead and run your contours, right? And so again, we're going to go ahead and continue to use a number of different tools here. But if I were to go ahead and bring in my DEM, remember, don't use your hillshade, don't use your aspect layer, and bring this in. Right now I'm just going to do contour, and I'm going to do 10 foot. You can do 1 foot intervals if you want. This is where you would type that in, contour interval. I'm going to say 10. That's what I'm looking for. I'm going to go ahead and hit run. I'll pause the video while this takes care of that. And now what you'll see is that now I have 10-foot contours. Remember that you can always come in and tell it that you want to label those, right? And it will actually go ahead and bring that up. and label out those contours. I've got an issue right now that I don't believe that is actually telling me so make sure to always go to your labeling properties, and underneath here, I actually want the field is that, come on. I need to go ahead and change this out. That's fine. Want to go ahead and insert values feature. I don't want the expression equals feature ID. I want the expression to equal contour. I'm going to go ahead and hit apply there. Let that go ahead and repopulate. That should, if I'm looking at the right thing, that should go ahead and clean everything up for me. It did. I can see it populated in now. But where that information is coming from is here's that 10-foot contour data, and now that 10-foot contour data is being displayed on my map. So that's how we go ahead and get contours involved. Again, let's go ahead and keep working through possibilities here in this toolbox. We can also go ahead and look at slope. And so again, this is where we can come in and tell the DEM becomes very important. And so I'm going to have slope here for Mount Rushmore. And so go ahead and label that. I tend to work in percent rise. I'm more comfortable with it. If you're more comfortable in degrees, you can do that as well. But you can go ahead and set this up this way. Go ahead and click run. I'm going to pause the video while that runs. All right, here underneath slope, this is the result that comes in. You can see that it's a classified result, so if you want to go ahead and change up the symbology, you can. This is pretty common. We call it stoplight analysis, right? Red is, severe slopes. But remember that you can go in and change this all up. You can go ahead and actually come in and change as a manual interval. What this allows you to do is that you can actually come in and edit these. So if you want to edit the slope values so that very, very low is 0 to 5, and you want to do 10, 15, and then let's just do 25, and then everything above that. You're going to see that in this particular landscape that lots and lots of areas start to pop up. But this allows you to go ahead and set meaningful controls, 5% being ADA accessibility, 10% starting between 10 and 15%. You basically are starting to get to a point where vehicles can't traverse this landscape. 25%, you're getting above what most hikers can do, right? Especially without gear, right? And this helps break down a landscape this way. So this allows you to go ahead and make changes in symbology. The other thing that I think is really helpful is remember that we can always come back in and change the transparency up on this landscape. So you can go ahead and kind of blend that into the background. I think I want to show a little bit more of it, right? But in this case, it allows you to kind of come in and still see things. Remember, you can always come in and do this with the swipe tool so that you can go ahead and see things underneath it. Anyway, I'll let you go ahead and play around with that. But again, these are the basic tools that you're going to encounter working with digital elevation models. So we have done a hillshade, we've done slope, we've done contours, and we've done aspect. There are a few other tools in that toolbox that you're more than welcome to play around with. Things like view sheds are really important. You have to set kind of points or lines from which you are trying to be the observer, and then it will show you how far out into the landscape you can actually see, which is kind of a cool analysis as well. But ultimately, where all of this is going is that, remember I showed you we can drop the hillshade into a scene. Well, one of the great things that's actually happened is that you can actually drop all of these layers into a scene. I should turn off some things that we haven't yet done. Specifically, we're going to work on in our next video is how water moves across this landscape. But this is just me going ahead and setting it up so that I can actually see slope. And I need to go ahead and grab my Explore tool back here. And so this is just slope overlaid with the hillshade on top of the Esri World Elevation 3D terrain model. Right, and so you can see that I can now have control to kind of zoom in and around this landscape and really get a good sense for what I'm looking at here. In addition to that, if I want to go ahead and turn my contour information on, right, we just produced those contours. It's going to take a second for these to populate. But if I want to go ahead and flip that on, you can actually see that It has some struggles in some of the extreme topography, but for the vast majority of the landscape, even over here on the roads, you're going to get a very, very accurate representation of what's occurring in terms